Welcome back. Pension fund returns have stumbled since the 2008 financial crisis, and with the global economy still struggling to recover, South Africans are being warned to up their savings for retirement. Well, Gunther is joined by Candice Paine from Sanlam Investment Management at the JSE to talk about just how South Africans should approach retirement savings.
Thank you, Devin. Yes, Candice Paine is here with me from Sanlam Investment Management. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you, Gunther.
We live in a time when returns aren't exactly what we would like them to be. So, well, people have spoken about a lost decade ahead for equities at least. Do pension funds face the same thing?
I wouldn't want to predict a lost decade. I think we're going to have a really tough decade. We've got lower global economic growth. That's going to translate into lower corporate earnings, which means that we will see lower performance going forward. But pension funds, out of necessity, are not only invested in equities, so hopefully fund managers can find some sort of outperformance or alpha in the other asset classes that are available to them.
If someone was about to retire now during this time, we would imagine their money to be in a fixed asset, which doesn't fluctuate too much. But we've also got inflation to face at the same time. How can people help themselves in a situation like that?
It's very difficult to help yourself right before retirement. If you haven't saved enough, you can't generally invest your way out of that problem. What you do need to start doing is looking at protecting your capital, maybe looking at buying guaranteed annuities as opposed to living annuities, which are invested directly in the stock market. But whichever way you look at it, if you haven't saved enough before retirement, you're going to have to pull your belt in or carry on working.
Which age group would you say should be the most vigilant at this time?
I think every age group should be vigilant at all times. I think younger people have the benefit of looking at what their parents have done, so start saving as young as you can, save as much as you can. I think if you're close to retirement, you are looking at capital protection, you are looking at alternative sources of income, so maybe consulting or continuing working if you haven't saved enough. And on the continuum, anywhere between that, people need to take heed of the fact that we need to spend less and save more.
Some would say, well, I've got a pension fund with my employer, I don't need to worry so much. But we find so many people, when they do retire on their employer's pension fund, it turns out not to be enough.
And that's usually the case. It usually isn't enough. So people need to start looking at taking out alternative sources of pension funding, like retirement annuities, maybe purchasing things like property going forward, because definitely just relying on one pension fund, as we've seen with inflation and the growth in assets that we're seeing going forward, it just isn't going to be enough for people to retire on.
How do we choose these additional investments?
What we would suggest from a Sanlam perspective is that you speak to a financial advisor, because it is a complicated world out there and you do need somebody who has the expertise to navigate it for you. And once you've found a trusted financial advisor, they will demystify this world to you.
And how do we break down perceptions? Some people just don't have any trust in anyone who's got any financial professional title behind them. How do we deal with that?
You know, our industry is fiercely regulated, so I would suggest that people stick with regulated vehicles. Most of the problems that we're seeing are in the unregulated vehicles, where bodies like the FSB or a CISA have no control over.
Yeah.
So stick to an accredited financial advisor and stick to a regulated vehicle, and you really can't go wrong. One of the other things that I would recommend is that people upskill themselves and educate themselves on finances, on their own finances, how assets grow, and particularly what they can expect when they retire. That way you manage your expectations and you limit surprises.
Last but not least, and probably the most important question, is people who have already retired are sitting with negative real interest rates. What advice can you give to them? Is there anything that they can do perhaps to maybe dabble a bit here and there to try increase their returns?
There's not much that they can do to increase their returns, because what you're suggesting is that they take on more risk. And with risk comes volatility and also the obvious risk of losing some of their capital. Some of the things that they can do is look at the amount that they are drawing out of their pension fund. And if they can reduce that in any way, that is great, because while there are limited returns or lower returns in the market, if you're not drawing so much, it gives your capital an opportunity to grow. But otherwise, people need to start maybe thinking about finding ways of going back to work if they haven't retired with sufficient money.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gunther.
That was Candice Paine from Sanlam Investment Management with a word or two on pension and retirement. Back studio.